The wind in the Montana Territory cried like a wounded animal as it rolled across the open plains. It was the kind of wind that carried frost, fear, and warnings. The year was 1847, and winter was coming early. Abigail Thornfield stood on the porch of her lonely cabin, watching the sun sink behind the jagged mountains. The sky looked like old metal, bruised and heavy, and she felt the cold settle deep inside her bones. It had been 6 long months since her husband Samuel was buried in the small patch of land behind the barn. 6 months of fixing fences alone, feeding cattle alone, sleeping in a silent house that felt far too big for one person. Folks in town had tried to help at first, but as the seasons changed, the visits stopped. Everyone had their own troubles. A widow's ranch rarely lasted long out here. People expected the land to swallow her whole. She pulled her shawl tight and turned to go back inside when she froze. 2 riders were coming up the road. Strangers. Their silhouettes moved slow against the dying light. Her hand went to the Winchester by the door. Travelers rarely came this far unless they wanted something, and trouble often came right with them. As the riders reached her gate, the taller one climbed down from the saddle. He moved like a man who had spent weeks riding with no rest. He took off his hat and called out, "Ma'am, sorry to trouble you this late. Name's Nathaniel Blackwood. I was told you might be needing a ranch hand." Abigail kept her hand near the rifle. "Who told you that?" "The fellow at the general store," Nathaniel said. "Said the widow Thornfield was trying to run a ranch alone. Said you were too proud to ask for help, but might not turn it away." Despite herself, Abigail almost smiled. That sounded like old Henry, always pushing his nose where it didn't belong. "And you just happened to be looking for work?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. "Truth is, we've been riding nearly 3 weeks. My daughter and I need a place to winter. I'm good with cattle, good with mending, and I don't drink or gamble. I work honest, ma'am." It was then the small rider slid off the second horse. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, thin as a willow branch. Her dress was dusty, the hem let down more than once. She hugged a cloth doll to her chest and looked up with wide, tired eyes. "Papa," she whispered, "I'm cold." Something inside Abigail cracked. The cabin behind her was silent, empty, cold in its own way. She had grown used to setting one place at the table instead of 2. She had grown used to loneliness, but she had never grown to like it. "What's your daughter's name?" she asked softly. "Evangelene," Nathaniel said. "But she answers to Evie." Abigail looked at them, truly looked. The man's coat was worn thin, his boots nearly through at the heels. The child was trying her best to stay brave, but her shaking shoulders gave her away. For a moment, Abigail thought of turning them away. A widow taking in a strange man was not something folks looked kindly on, but she also thought of the long winter ahead, of the empty rooms, of the quiet that felt heavier every night. "You can put your horses in the barn," she said at last. "There's fresh hay in the loft. When you're done, come inside. I've got stew on." "Enough for 3. Relief touched Nathaniel's face, though he tried to hide it. "We're obliged, ma'am." As they walked their horses toward the barn, Abigail watched the little girl holding tightly to her father's hand. The wind swept dried leaves across the yard, but for the first time in months, the cold didn't feel quite so sharp. Inside, Abigail added more wood to the fire and set 3 bowls on the table instead of 1. The cabin felt different, as if it had been asleep for months and was waking up again. A memory flashed through her mind. Samuel standing on her father's porch 10 years ago, asking for work, hat in hand, hope in his eyes. Now she stood on the other side of that story, holding someone else's fate in her hands. A soft knock sounded on the door. When she opened it, Nathaniel and his daughter stood on the porch, their faces washed clean, their clothes brushed down. The girl clutched her doll, looking nervous and hopeful all at once. "Come in," Abigail said. "Warm yourselves." Evangelene stepped inside first, her eyes going wide at the quilts on the walls and the fire crackling softly. It wasn't much, but to someone who had been writing for weeks, it probably felt like heaven. At supper, Nathaniel ate like a man who had gone hungry too many times. Evangelene fought to stay awake between bites. Abigail watched them, the tired father, the brave little girl, and something inside her shifted. When the child began to nod off, Abigail touched her shoulder gently. "There's a small room off the kitchen. It isn't much, but it's warm. You're welcome to stay in it." Nathaniel looked at her, surprised. "Are you offering us the job?" "I'm offering you a trial," she corrected. 2 weeks. Winter's close, and I need someone who works smart. If you can do that, you'll stay. If not, we'll part ways." Nathaniel nodded. "You'll have no trouble with me, ma'am. You have my word." They shook hands across the table, a simple gesture. But out here, it meant everything. As the fire crackled and the wind growled outside, Abigail realized something she hadn't felt in months. Hope had returned to her doorstep, and it came carrying a little girl with tired eyes. The first morning on the Thornfield ranch began long before sunrise. Nathaniel woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then he heard Evangelene's soft breathing beside him, and memory returned. The widow's kindness, the warm stew, the offer of work. He pulled on his boots quietly and stepped into the main room. Abigail was already at the stove, moving with the calm skill of someone who had lived too long with early mornings. "Coffee's ready," she said without turning. "Breakfast will be done soon." "You're up early," he said. "Ranch doesn't run on wishing," she answered. Before they could speak more, a small voice whispered, "Papa?" Evangelene stood in the doorway, hair messy from sleep, her doll tucked under one arm. She looked shyly at Abigail. "Good morning," Abigail said warmly. "Would you like some milk?" The child's eyes grew wide. "Real milk?" "Fresh from the cow," Abigail said. Evangelene nodded, barely daring to breathe. They sat down to breakfast together. It felt strange in a good way. Strange for Abigail to see 2 seats filled again. Strange for Nathaniel to have a real table instead of a campfire. Strange for Evangelene to eat without saving half her biscuit for later. "You don't need to hide food here," Abigail said gently. "There's plenty." Evangelene blushed and nodded. After breakfast, the day's work began. Nathaniel stepped out to inspect the ranch in daylight. Now he understood why Abigail needed help. Fences leaned, gates sagged, tools were worn to nothing. A ranch this size was too much for one person, too much even for 2. But he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. While Nathaniel repaired the corral, Abigail gave Evangelene simple chores: feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, sweeping the porch. The child followed her like a little shadow, soaking up every bit of attention. Each time Nathaniel glanced toward the house, he saw something new. Evangelene laughing as a hen flapped at her feet. Abigail smoothing the child's hair when she grew shy. The 2 of them kneeling beside the kittens in the barn, whispering as if they shared secrets. It did something to him, something deep. By midday, they all met at the water pump. Evangelene ran up with her dress dusty and her smile bright. "Papa, I collected 12 eggs." 12? He said proudly. That's more than some grown hands manage." Abigail smiled at the girl. She works hard and learns fast. Later that afternoon, the real test came, moving the cattle down from summer pasture before the cold set in. It was work for 3 or 4 grown men. Abigail planned to take it slow over several days, but Nathaniel had a different idea. "Evie can ride," he said. "Been doing it since she could walk. Let her help." Abigail hesitated. "She's just a child." "She's a rancher's child," Nathaniel replied softly. "This land teaches them fast." Abigail studied him, then nodded. "All right, but she stays between us." Evangeline nearly shook with excitement as they saddled the horses. Abigail found an old youth saddle in the barn that fit her perfectly. When they rode out, the little girl sat tall and proud, her braids swinging in the wind. The cattle were scattered across a wide meadow. Together, the 3 of them worked like a team that had been together for years. Nathaniel on the left flank, Abigail on the right, Evangeline riding sweep, blocking the animals that tried to break away. "Steady and calm," Nathaniel called to her. "They feel what you feel." By late afternoon, more than half the herd was down in the lower pasture. As they rode home, the sky blazed gold and pink behind the mountains. Evangeline leaned against her saddle horn, tired but glowing. "Did I do good, Papa?" she asked. "You did better than good," he said. "You earned your place today." Abigail rode beside them and smiled softly at the child. "Professional ranch hands get paid," she said. She reached into her pocket and pressed a silver dollar into Evangeline's palm. The little girl stared at it, like it was a miracle. "My own dollar?" she whispered. "Yours," Abigail said. "You earned it." That night, they ate warm bread and honey, Abigail teaching the child how to knead dough and wipe flour from her face. Evangeline giggled until her sides hurt. Nathaniel watched them both with a tightness in his chest he didn't know how to name. Later, after Evangeline fell asleep, Nathaniel stepped outside with Abigail. The stars were bright above the dark land. "You're good with her," he said quietly. "She just needed someone to see her," Abigail replied. Nathaniel nodded. "So did I." They stood in silence, close enough to feel the heat from each other's shoulders. Inside the house, the fire burned steady, not just in the hearth, but in something new forming between the 3 of them. Not quite family, not yet, but something close, something dangerous, something hopeful. As the wind brushed across the plains, Abigail looked at Nathaniel and said, "Thank you. For today. For giving this place life again." He shook his head. "You gave us a home." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. They understood something was changing, and fate was about to test them harder than any winter ever could. Trouble came before dawn. Nathaniel was finishing chores in the barn when he heard horses. Not 1, not 2, many. They were moving slow, careful, as if they didn't want to be heard. His stomach tightened. Nothing good ever rode that quiet. He hurried toward the house. "Abigail," he whispered through the door. "Wake up. We have company." She was already on her feet, fully dressed, a lantern in her hand. Evangeline sat up in bed, fear in her eyes. "Papa?" she whispered. "Get to the root cellar with Mrs. Abigail," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Stay down there, no matter what happens." Evangeline clung to her doll. "Are the bad men coming back?" Nathaniel knelt and kissed her forehead. "Not for you, and not for your mama. I won't let them." He opened the cellar door and guided them down, then shut it softly. Outside, dark shapes gathered at the edge of the yard. 8 mounted men. Lantern light flickered across their faces. Pike Morrison rode in front. He stopped his horse just yards away. "Evening, Blackwood," he said, his voice cold. "Got business with you." Nathaniel stood tall. "Name it." "We're taking you in," Morrison said. "For questioning. Marshal's orders." "That's so," Nathaniel said. "Then show me the warrant." Morrison smiled a sharp, ugly smile. "Don't got it with me." "Then you don't got anything," Nathaniel said. The men behind Morrison chuckled darkly, but tension ran through the air like a stretched wire. "We can do this easy," Morrison said, "or we can do it hard." Nathaniel didn't move. "You're not taking me anywhere." Morrison lifted his hand. The moment before violence broke open, another sound cut through the dark. Hooves. Dozens. A new set of riders poured into the yard like a wave, rifles raised. Tom Patterson at the front. Beside him, the territorial marshal. Morrison's face twisted. "You brought friends." "They brought themselves," Nathaniel said. The marshal stepped forward. "Pike Morrison," he said, his voice echoing across the yard. "You're under arrest for attempted kidnapping, trespassing, and armed threat." The men behind Morrison shifted nervously. "You can't arrest us all," Morrison barked. "We don't need to," the marshal said. "Just the ones dumb enough to keep fighting." Morrison looked from the marshal to the circle of rifles, then back to Nathaniel. His eyes burned with hate. "This ain't over, Blackwood." "It is for you," Nathaniel said. Morrison drew his gun. A single shot cracked through the cold air. Morrison fell from his saddle before he could fire. Silence swallowed the yard. The marshal lowered his smoking pistol. "Self-defense," he said firmly. "You all saw him draw first." The other riders dropped their guns to the ground. Nathaniel breathed out slowly. It was over. For now. He ran to the cellar and opened the door. Abigail caught hold of him instantly, shaking, her breath unsteady. "You're safe," he said, pulling her close. "It's done." Evangelene wrapped her arms around his waist. "Papa, did we win?" "We did, sunshine," he whispered. "We sure did." The marshal supervised the cleanup and arrests, then rode off before sunrise. The neighbors stayed until daylight broke, promising to stand guard for as long as needed. The Thornfield ranch wasn't alone anymore. Days passed. Weeks passed. Hartwell's crimes came to light. Fraud, arson, threats, false land claims. Witnesses stepped forward. The evidence proved strong. He was taken by federal marshals to stand trial. Without him, the valley breathed again. Life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as life on a frontier could ever be. Nathaniel worked every day, repairing what had been broken. Abigail handled accounts and kept the ranch running steady, and Evangelene brought laughter back into the rooms that once held only quiet. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Nathaniel stood on the porch watching Abigail braid Evangelene's hair. They looked like something he had once dreamed of, and then lost. Abigail glanced up and caught him staring. "What?" she asked softly. "Nothing," he said. "Just grateful." She smiled, the soft, tired smile of a woman who had fought hard for every piece of peace she owned. "Nathaniel," she said gently, "sit." He did. She took his hands. "I know life pushed us together, loss pushed us, hardship pushed us, but what we have, it doesn't feel like accident." "It isn't," he said. And then he said the words he had carried for weeks. "I love you, Abigail. You and Evangelene both. You two saved me more than I ever saved you." Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't just save us," she whispered. "You made us whole." Evangeline climbed into both their laps. Are we a real family now? Nathaniel and Abigail looked at each other. They both smiled. Yes, they said together. Yes, sweetheart, we are. Spring came early that year. Flowers bloomed where snow had fallen thick. The valley healed. The people healed. And so did the Thornfield Blackwood family. The ranch grew stronger. The community grew tighter. And Nathaniel, Abigail, and Evangelene built a life that was shaped not by fear, but by love, hope, and second chances. What began with a lonely knock on a widow's door became a whole new beginning. A home, a family, a future, and they faced it together, hand in hand, under the wide Montana sky.